Local government should just be providing a safe and sustainable environment for the people that live here.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets.
Hello and welcome back to the Grand Failure Beyond the Streets podcast. I'm your host, Rebekah Massie, and today, instead of talking about traffic or other issues within our city of Surprise, I am going to talk about something that is in season. And no, I don't mean Christmas in July. What I do mean is election 2024. So for those of you who don't know, in less than 2 weeks, on July 30th, our city has election day. Now, you may be thinking, Rebekah, that's the primary election, right? Yes. For just about everything else in the state, it is the primary election. You are correct. However, for our city, we actually vote for new council members, the next mayor, and even vote to ratify, or whether or not to ratify, I should say, the 2040 general plan, all on that primary ballot. So that means that unless for some reason there is a need for a runoff election on the November ballot for the mayoral race, for instance, since that's the only contested election, we will know exactly who will be at the helm early next year once they get sworn into office, which is some pretty exciting stuff, if you ask me. And to honor that, I wanted to actually get a chance to speak with the candidates directly and interview them. So each of the next 4 episodes, so episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10, respectively, of the Grand Failure podcast, will feature an exclusive interview with one of the candidates that's running for office currently within our city. Before I introduce this episode's guest, I'd like to go over just a few things. For those of you who don't know, or maybe this is your first time tuning in, hi, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. I am very big as a person on transparency. And I'm going to go over the ground rules and kind of lay all of my cards on the table, so to speak, as far as how I communicated with the candidates and how I let them know these interviews would be conducted. And that way, you know, when I play the recording here in a few moments, exactly how all of this went down, right? I'm a relatively informal person, so we did these interviews remotely. The questions were given to the candidates ahead of time. Each candidate received the same list of questions. I also did extend an invitation to every single person running for office, all 6 of them. And you may be saying, hey, Rebekah, you said 4 episodes a minute ago. You're right. I did. I had 2 individuals hold out. I did try. And again, everybody got the same messages. Everybody got the same questions. Everybody got the same spiel, so to speak, from me as far as how we were going to go about this. And I'm sharing this with you just so that way you, as my listeners, and more importantly, if this gets shared around a little bit more, since we're talking candidates and election, that the overall community of Surprise would understand the thought process behind this and the care that I took to ensure that, despite my personal opinions, that I was going to conduct these interviews in a very nonpartisan manner. It would be not interjected either consciously or unconsciously with my own biases or opinions, political views, etc. And that you, the community at large, right, has the opportunity to get a feel for who these individuals in our community are that are seeking public office, what their platform is, their experience, their vision for the city, right? And most importantly, even though we have a couple of different types of races going on, right? All of our city council seats have elections that are running unopposed. So these folks are likely going to get elected, right? They're the only option on the ballot. But in interviewing them, it gives a look into maybe somebody who hasn't had much of an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with these folks, or if maybe these folks don't even represent your district that you live within, the council is a governing body, right? There's 6 city council members, one for each of the districts. And then there's the mayor, total of 7 persons on this body. They work together. And being able to see how the different pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, or the different individuals within this group of people operate individually and how they view the team as a whole is going to be very insightful as to the direction our city is headed here in the next few years. And then for the contested race, i.e. the mayoral race for our little city here, not so little anymore, if for some reason you are on the fence of the 2 candidates I was able to get to interview with me, hopefully this will help clear things up on where they stand and be able for you to compare a little bit more apples to apples versus what you see kind of pushed out on social media, what you see in the local papers, and so forth. So anywho, now that I've laid out the ground rules, let me go ahead and talk about this episode's guest. Okay, so I've kept you on the hook long enough. I've went through all my guidelines. Without further ado, I'd like to jump in and introduce you to today's guest. In a few moments, you're going to hear the interview that I conducted with our current sitting council member in District 3, for those of you who live out that way, Patrick Duffy. Now, Mr. Patrick Duffy is running for re-election. This is not his first time seeking re-election, and certainly not his first rodeo. He's been in office for a few years now. And in this interview, I hope you find it very insightful. I know I did. You'll get to hear a little bit about how this whole notion of him jumping in and serving his community started, where he stands on things today, and what he feels is most important for our growing city as we continue to expand. All right, like I said, we're going to jump right into the interview here now with Mr. Patrick Duffy, who is running for Surprise City Council in District 3. Not sure if you had a chance to look over any of the questions or not, but they're all pretty straightforward and more or less just give you a chance to talk about qualifications, experience, what got you into government in the first place, and what your goals are for running for re-election, since this is not your first rodeo.
No, definitely not.
Well, let's go ahead and jump right in then. So the first one is, can you share with me your qualifications and experience relevant to taking a role in our local city government?
Okay, sure. So first, I was actually a political science major at Arizona State. I didn't do that to ever think I'd be doing this. Actually, the plan was to go to law school, and I wanted to be a sports agent. That was the whole deal. And then I was working recreation for the city part-time, and I was a Merrill Lynch advisor. And I got to know some council members, John Williams, who was District 3 before me, and I got to know him a little bit. And he had just won re-election in 2016, and then told me like 8 months later he resigned. So he's like, "What do you think? You should try." So I applied, and then I 4 votes to whatever it was, 4-2, and then I had to run again the year later to finish his term, and then run again 2 years after that for a full term. So experience-wise, I'll be coming up on 7 years in September on the city council. And I think that long of a time, 2 different mayors, bunch of different council members, that should qualify enough. I hope. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
You would hope, right?
But define qualifications. I mean, I had no business that I thought being in this. You just have to want to do it. There's a lot to it, and you have to do it for the right reasons. That's the part that bothers me when some people do it.
No, and that definitely makes sense. It kind of sounds like you were a little reluctant at first, maybe, and then some folks motivated you to step in after they left and whatnot, and then the rest is kind of history. So you kind of maybe already touched on it, but when you decided to actually pursue getting nominated, of course, since you had to finish out the prior council member's term, what initially motivated you? Was it just somebody saying, "Hey, you should step up," or was there something else that maybe was kind of gnawing in the back of your brain saying, "Hey, I should do this"?
It wasn't so much that told me to do it. It's when I worked recreation, I mean, you sat out there, we set up fields, and then you sat there talking to parents, coaches for hours, and you would always hear it. the city doesn't have enough of this, or we don't have enough of that. City Hall did this, City Hall did that. And I wasn't too familiar with the City Hall thing. I had never even been to a council meeting until I was appointed, until my interview. But just listening to people tell me about stuff and how we needed more fields and we spent too much money on City Hall. I mean, that was like a big issue a while ago, was how much money was spent on City Hall. So it was a lot of that. And I don't know, I think when the first bond came out, they left recreation off of it. That really bothered me. And I thought, because it failed the first time, and then they kind of broke it up and still left recreation off. And that bothered me because why would you keep it off? It was an individual vote. If people don't want it, they don't want it. They wouldn't have voted for it. But to keep it off, and I thought the council back then did not a good job. I thought they ignored special events. I thought they ignored Parks and Rec. So that's really why I was interested in doing it.
Gotcha, to kind of bring some services back to the people that they were actually wanting.
Yeah, we were growing so fast and not even close to keeping up. And
would you say that maybe your motivations changed throughout the years and throughout your experience, or has it still been pretty much true? It's
still the same because we're still growing so fast, and government was extremely slow. And I think that bothers me. Like,
what do you mean, Patrick?
7 years, we've gotten one pool. I mean, we've got, some parks and stuff like that, but not even that. It's like out where I live, west of the 303, Cactus Road was a disaster. I'm not going to touch on your roads yet.
I was going to say,
let me whine about my road first.
No, but you guys did definitely have some scalloped roads down there for sure.
Yeah, you're hopping over, half mile of nothing to a mile, then to nothing. And I said, this is embarrassing. And then every time, it rained, Saraval would flood at Cactus. And I said, we're too big of a city to have roads flood like this. I said, this is embarrassing. So it's time to do something. So the goal is still the same. It's just the priorities. I thought, my own district, it's going. We got Cactus Road, the aquatic center. There's a couple other things I want to work on, but the attention needs to head out to your area. All of us, not just Nick Haney, all of us.
I mean, we have the most room for growth, whereas most of the other districts are kind of, when I talked to Johnny Melton about his campaign, he's like, well, in District 4, we're pretty well landlocked. And I was like, right, and we don't have that up in District 1, right? We're still growing out. It's not that everything's been divvied up completely yet. So there's still a lot of different things, but still, I mean, there's a lot of attention needed on a lot of different things. So moving into the next question, I'll combine 3 and 4 because I feel like your key points of your campaign platform and what you feel the 3 most important issues the city's facing today. I'm finding often that those are going hand in hand for a lot of the candidates. So what do you think are 3 or so of the most important issues, and how does that play into sort of what you're running your campaign on this go round?
Well, infrastructure is the big one, but also revenue. And then I was always huge on Parks and Rec, but I think we've done stuff there. So I'll slide that back to 3. I don't always think that needs to be number 1 because there's bigger issues. And infrastructure out in your area, the fact the state just kind of looked past it and money didn't go where it was supposed to. And it was kind of I don't know if I would say, well, I guess a lazy way of doing the 303 grand interchange. I said it to ADOT when they were there. The fact you didn't do 2 flyover, it's ridiculous. And they can say whatever they want, but the reason was they didn't want to deal with the railroad tracks and what that might have cost them to do it. Well, now everyone's paying for it.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of conflicting stories where I've heard that the city had the opportunity for the flyover and the city had no. I've heard from ADOT, that there's no money, but then they fronted money for the chip plant exits up off the northern part of the 303. So it's just, I think you're right. I think it's a mess, and I think it's kind of been the lazy cop-out method for long enough to where now everybody's at a point where somebody has to do something. So
there's always money. I don't buy that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like a catch-22. There's money, but it's maybe already earmarked or allocated or, quid pro quo or whatever other phrase or
you make your plan, stuff changes.
It does.
Your plans, and that's the problem with what we're dealing with now with Grand. I mean, not saying it's entirely their fault. We made decisions too that didn't help that area. So I'm not innocent. I didn't say that.
No, and I'm not looking for a blame game. This is merely more conversation wise of
Yeah, I get it.
kind of where the city is at. So it sounds like infrastructure really is the key focus this go around. And I think you're right. It probably should be the focus of everybody, not just Haney, who serves District 1. So how do you think, or how do you plan to help in addressing some of these issues with the infrastructure problems we have, whether it's scalloped roads up in District 1 or anything around the city?
Well, in my own experience, Cactus Road was one we used from Reams to 175th. That was non-bond money, and that came to every time we did, our budget retreats a few years ago. That was my number one because I told everybody we're in a race against Prasada, and if we don't do something with all they're putting in there, which they can put as much as they can fit, which you've seen the parking lot, they put as much as they can fit in there, that we're in trouble.
Maybe even a little more than they could fit realistically.
Yeah. So it's on a race, and I said, yeah, we cannot wait on the development to come like we normally do. I'm okay with the system of doing that, but there's times where you can't wait and do it. So it was time for us to put up. And then, you can lien the property. It's a 10-year lien. But it was funny how once we decided to do it, all this development, the Home Depots of the world, they all jumped in. So we'll get something back. But it's stuff like that. You just have to be vocal about it. Be loud about your own district, but we also need to be aware of the other districts. It's like we're all center focused on our own, but we shouldn't be.
Yeah, maybe get a little out of the siloed mentality that sometimes everybody seems to let befall them.
Yeah, for some, I've heard some not know any issues that are happening in other districts, and that's not a good thing. We all should know. You should be talking to the other council members. The fact if people don't, that's not a team. It's not. Well, I'm one of 7. Nothing happens just me, and never will.
No, and I think that's a good call out. It's kind of just being aware, and even if it's not, you have the time to go up and visit District 1, or I know I've seen you at one of Haney's meetings, or maybe a couple of them. It's even just a matter of, I would say, probably paying attention to what your peers are going through, posting on their socials, for council communications, looking at their emails, even paying attention to the updates that you guys typically give, twice monthly at the end of each council meeting, and just seeing what the buzz is in that particular district probably goes a long way for you all.
It does.
So moving into kind of more action or government-based or role-based questions. So in municipal government, what do you feel should be the core responsibilities of local government?
Local government should just be providing a safe and sustainable environment for the people that live here. We create and enforce certain ordinances, things like that, and you stay on that kind of stuff. But when it goes back to what we were saying with infrastructure, Parks and Rec, attracting businesses here, they all fall in place with each other. But the biggest thing is you want people to be happy living here. And we were selected to represent a large number of people who want to continue that or make it better if they're not. And if we base our decisions off the people that are essentially voting us in, like we always say when we run, you hear it every time, then you'll be fine. But if we don't, you don't belong in this. I don't think self-interest serve any purpose in this. Any government.
And I think that's really important, right? Because I know you mentioned earlier when talking about qualifications, it's getting people who want to do it, but do it for the right reasons. And I think the attitude that just you've kind of conveyed so far is that not necessarily that you were even reluctant from the start, but just you had never even given a thought to until it was kind of brought to your attention. I mean, that in and of itself means that you're more than likely a humble person, right? Which means that you're not going to get caught up in the what my legacy is or what I accomplished this term or what have you. It's all about focusing on the issues, focusing on the people that put you in office in the first place.
When I was asked, when the mayor's seat was open, and I'll give an example of it, and I was asked to do it, but the mayor does more than we do. There's more engagements, there's more speaking things, there's all that kind of stuff. I like picking my son up from school. I like taking him to school. I like going to all his sports. And like I've told everybody, at some point, this surprise council is going to end. And I'm just going to be probably a name on a plaque somewhere. But my boy's not going to forget if I missed things or if I wasn't there. So I always told people the city will forget me. My son won't. So I think those are the priorities that I keep, but not everybody needs to be that way, but that's how I do it.
But I think that's important in grounding yourself, right? Like too many times people kind of, and by people, I mean people in general, right? they kind of look at government as something that's intangible. It just is there. Like you don't interact with them on a daily basis. And I think especially when it gets to the municipal level, people forget that at the end of the day, you guys that are serving on the council are ultimately, friends, family, neighbors, whatever. It's not that many degrees of separation from you to me or vice versa. Like we're all kind of there. And I think having that humble approach is great. Moving into kind of the opinion and people's opinions. Since you've been in council for about 7 years, you're no stranger to council having made an unpopular decision or something that just rubbed the greater, or at least the vocal majority of people the wrong way. So how do you think the city should go about, as of late, kind of dispelling or changing the narrative a little bit surrounding their brand and get out of the city's not working for us type of mentality that you often see across social media pages?
Well, the big thing we did was our last meeting with censure. What would have been the point to go into a back room? There's no point in that, because people already think, and I've said it in meetings, that we're crooked or there's deals being done back there. When I ran the first time, my opponent, that's what was said. It was backdoor deals, and of course I go, no, there wasn't. But you guys don't know that. And if I wasn't in this position and I was upset about something that was happening, and the council just up and walked to the back, I'd think exactly the same thing. And I would be like, no, I don't want to listen to them because I know what they're doing back there, and it doesn't really matter what we say. Well, not going back there was the best thing we did. I'm glad we didn't. And I think we need to be transparent. I don't have anything to hide. I never do. So ask me whatever you want. I have no problem with people asking me things or doing things in front of everybody. The only time I think it's necessary is when it's a legal opinion. That's fine. But there wasn't a need for a legal opinion. So that's usually the biggest thing we get, is that we do things secretly. And I hate that, because that's what I think about the federal government. And I don't want to be them. I never want to be them.
No, I definitely wouldn't either. I don't think my hair would put up with it. I'd have so much gray by the time,
Mine's
to
falling
do anything, So it's crazy to me. Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there with being transparent and not doing as little in the back room as possible. I think is going to go a long way. And so really, I'm glad that you're on board with it. And I think some of the people that are coming into council for their first term are likely on board for it, at least from the limited conversations that I've had with them. In one way or another, we're getting a new mayor, whether it's an existing council member or one of the two other newcomers. There's definitely going to be a dynamic change, I think. And I know the newspapers have been quoted saying, change of the guard, old guard with the new guard type of a thing. And I think we're really at a crossroads now as a city. And even just as an outsider looking in, right, like me, a resident doing what I do, there's a real opportunity for you guys to kind of turn it around and start working, or at least creating the appearance a bit more that you're working with people, even if that's always been the case. So speaking of public opinion, I know you are very familiar with this because it happened in your very own district. So with the referendum that was run by Voice of Surprise, we kind of know how that went, right? Like it was an administrative versus a legislative, which is why the referendum failed. So you voted no, correct? You voted against that?
Yes.
So looking back on that vote, do you stand by your vote? Would you have changed it with any of the new information that's come to light, or any other thoughts that you would like to share?
There is no chance you could get me to change my vote on that. And I said it in that meeting, and I thought I was right. That's the one time I would say I thought I was right. That PAD was approved for a specific project a long time ago. That project didn't come just to find tiny loopholes and then change everything that was supposed to be and not have to go through the rezone process. That's ridiculous. Because would council have approved this project back then that the Dominion project? I doubt it. They were shown something way better. And so they approved it. And then it went away, and then we got thrown something completely different. And that drove me absolutely insane. So there's no chance I would have changed it. I would have taken a lawsuit. We already got one. But with the referendum, it was a lawsuit anyway.
Yeah, difference is it was your own citizens fighting you versus a developer.
Yeah, and the citizens didn't deserve any of that. The fact they came together like that and got those signatures, that's incredible. And I love that group. If it wasn't for that group, I like being held accountable. Even you're
Yeah.
the have out there the grand failure.
Yeah.
Okay. It is. It's
Yeah.
no,
I
I
mean,
don't
and
hide from it. It's not good.
it's not, right? And, even though it's kind of my rodeo with the grand failure with, other people coming in and helping or just being other vocal residents, I formed it on purpose so that it was just a way to legitimize the effort and really talk about the grand failure and not even necessarily it being Grand Avenue, right? Like that's obviously tongue in cheek what it was ultimately originally about, but really it's the grand failure of government a little bit, and just how things get so gummed up, whether it's a technicality like the referendum or something as simple as, a gas station going up where rural residents don't want it or whatever the case may be. It's a tough area to strike a balance with for sure, but it's good to hear that there are some members of our local government, and I knew that it was probably going to be the case with you just based on conversations that you and I have had within council chambers, outside of council chambers and whatnot, but it's really refreshing to hear. And I know you've gone toe to toe with a couple of developers too, like the one rezone that was at 163rd and Joe Max a few months back, where you basically called out the developer going, you're essentially bribing us,
Yeah, and that's another thing. That what would that have looked like if we said yes to that? To
Terrible.
the image that we talked about earlier. That's terrible. If people already think we get paid under the table, developers don't like me, and that's fine because that's not who votes for me. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely don't like me either. I know a certain attorney that's a frequent flyer in council chambers does not like me. It is what it is. Don't do something shady.
Yeah.
And we won't have to have really awkward conversations.
Nope.
So moving into more unpopular opinions, and I promise this is really the last unpopular opinion question.
Okay.
If the decision were entirely up to you, we were talking about loss of revenue earlier, specifically the rental tax revenue is really what the city was missing out on. And I know that decision was made more at the state level than anything. But if the decision were entirely up to you, what actions would you have taken to help mitigate the deficit that we found ourselves up against?
Well, it was difficult because it started off as one issue, and then they threw us another one, and then the state came back and said, "Well, in the 25, you're going to have probably half of the 7 million again." So there was decisions to make, and I'm the one. I made it to raise the retail sales tax. The property tax dropped 25%. But the problem with cutting things is we're not in a recession, so we can't stop how fast we're growing. So I don't know how much we could have cut to keep the level of service we were giving. And I still think we need more parks and roads. So I don't know how we were supposed to cut it. Now, that being said, I'll never come back and try to raise a sales tax. I said, that's it. Now, that's why when the state said we were going to drop the property tax 50%, that's why I said, wait a second, I don't know if I would do that, because they already told us you're probably going to lose another 3 million in the revenue sharing for the following fiscal year. So I said, well, that 25% of that property that covers that, because I'm not coming back here and saying, oh, sorry, we were wrong again. We need you to bail us out again. Now we did. If it's more than 3 million, then there's no choice. You got to cut more things. Whether I don't like employees going or things like that, but then you really have to look into it. But as fast as we're growing, cutting employees and things like that, I don't see how we can keep up, because people already complain that we're too slow at everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not an enviable position that you're in. I can definitely appreciate your stance. I mean, I think you and I differ a little bit on tax, so I'm not going to get into a full-fledged debate or anything like that, but I think your insights in your position as far as why is probably the most straightforward answer I've gotten out of anybody that was for that tax increase. So thank you for that, because at least your logic is sound, I'm following it, right? We lost revenue. We wanted to decrease property taxes by 50%, but you said, hey, hold on, because we're probably going to lose more, which is smart, right? You don't want to reduce too much and then have to go back and raise stuff, because it kind of just feels a little bit like a bait and switch to the community. So I follow that logic. And even though I think that maybe there were some cuts that we could have made, I get your perspective on, hey, we're still growing, and so we don't want to necessarily cut things. And probably what I would have cut wouldn't have necessarily been the most popular decision, but Then again, you're elected. I'm not, right? And I can just voice my
You
opinion
could
loudly.
be.
I could be, I just don't. I'm kind of in the similar ballpark to you where I think my oldest is close in age to your youngest, if I'm not mistaken, because my oldest is my daughter and she's 10. She'll be 11 in December.
Yeah, Killian just turned 11.
Yeah, whereas I have, 10, almost 11, a boy that just turned 8, and then the terror, which, he turns 4 in November. And
Yeah, it's a balance.
it is.
Mhm.
And working full time, I'm fortunate enough to where my schedule is pretty flexible. My boss is not worried about when I'm putting my hours in. He's like, I know you're just getting stuff done. Like he even wrote in my mid-year, he's like, I'm going to put GSD down. And he goes, because you get stuff done. I was like, okay. Type of a thing. It's just one of those things where I could do it, but I also think you guys have rules of decorum, right? Whereas I don't necessarily have those same rules. So there's certain
I'm not
things that
great
I
at
can say. I'm not good either.
it.
Like even if I were elected, I would have perpetual foot in mouth disease for sure.
It's entertaining though.
Oh yeah. Especially since sarcasm and humor and typically dark humor are like my go-to coping mechanisms, it would just be cynical all of the time. So this one's kind of a little bit more of a fun question, but I feel like it kind of tells anybody who's listening a little bit about you and how your brain works. So Fantasy Draft City Council Edition, in your mind, if you could select a group of people to serve on the council with you for, council positions and mayor, what would your ideal group of officials look like? And you don't have to necessarily have a list of names or, upstanding pillars within the community, but as far as representation, what sort of ages do you think would represent the city? Life stages, employment status, experience, qualification, alignment on issues, anything else that you feel kind of helps you come together as one unified body? Because obviously you're good at what you're good at. Haney's good at one thing. Hastings is good as another, right? But you kind of need everybody to come together as a team.
Yeah, I want people who accept they understand what they're good at. And I want people who, I don't like egos. That part drives me crazy. Or self-interest stuff, or just likes to go to ribbon cuttings and just likes to be in that magazine once a month. That stuff drives me crazy. I'm not saying it's happening right now, but it has happened. I want people, and it doesn't matter how old they are. I mean, you get to a certain point, I guess. You shouldn't. But
yeah, if there's some sort of cognitive decline, and that happens regardless of age, because there's early onset things that happen.
Employment status, I've heard that tossed around a few times in different campaigns. If you can make it work and you want to make it work, make it work.
I think honestly, having some level of outside employment helps keep you grounded a little bit, because I feel like it's too easy to kind of slip into what I like to call my own BS, where if I'm off work, right, and I have nothing to do other than stuff that I do with the Grand Failure, or, I'm doing some sort of freelance work, like I'm in the process of designing a website for somebody right now. It's really easy for me to get kind of like lost in the sauce of whatever I'm doing if I'm siloed doing one thing, whereas having the multiple things, it rests those parts of my brain and I can kind of almost go back and say, hey, or if you're employed, right, then you know what the average employed resident of Surprise is likely going through, because it's probably similar to what you're dealing with, whether it's return to the office and now what was working, you're stuck commuting now because, you were telecommuting and now you're dealing with the scalloped roads or Grand in the 303 or whatever it is.
Yeah, we need opinionated people. I don't want someone who just falls in line with one other member and does whatever that member wants to do or what that agenda is. Have your own. We can discuss stuff. That's what it's for. And then you start to learn about each other and you kind of know who's good at what and how somebody feels about this. Like everyone knows Nick Haney is a public safety guy. Everybody knows that. But he should be. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, if he works in public safety, it makes sense. It'd be like if I were on council, I would be, even though I'm not quite in the IT space, I'm very, very close to that space at my employer, right? And what my degree is in. So obviously I would be the person who's like, hey, let's invest in self-service, let's invest in IT. And yes, it's a more, cost up front, because especially when you're establishing some sort of system or database or application or whatever, somebody has to build that, and that takes time, which is money. But the savings on the end and the ROI with that would, in theory, or if it were something that I were pushing, it would need to be a payoff, kind of like I'm sure when you look at different parks or things of that nature, it's okay, what's this area going to look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What are the houses going to be at it? What are the densities look like? Are we going to have a need for more athletic fields so that the city can provide more of these recreation services, right? Like, do we need libraries? Do we need more arts? Different things of that nature.
Need people who I don't want to use the word bully, but with all the high density stuff, the zoning cases, you can say they try to bully us a little bit and give us the narrative that there's a housing shortage. And of course, they've been saying it for 3 years. Have a backbone. That's not always the case. Like, research what you're being told, and don't just do it because we can, or somebody tells you there's a need. They're hired to get it approved. That's their job. So they're going to tell you
whatever they think is going to sell you on it, more or less. It's kind of like when you go on a used car lot and you're looking for something. It's the same thing. And
that's what drives me nuts. And another thing that people think about council is that we already have our minds made up as soon as it's brought to our attention. That's not entirely true. It could be. I mean, sometimes
I think for some of you, it definitely comes off that way. I know that it's not the case for all of you. I've definitely seen you and a few others up there on the dais change their mind, or even if it didn't necessarily sway your vote one way or the other, you were at least able to appreciate the difference of opinion.
Just how you got us. Is this in the best interest of the people that live out there or in my neighborhood, not the person who was hired to do it and then drives back to Scottsdale when they're done? It's not necessary. Yeah. I don't need those kind of people.
So to summarize then, as far as like an ideal group, it sounds to me like you're less concerned about ages, life stages, and employment status, but more so concerned about people who are able to understand what they're good at, partner with other people who are good in the areas that they're maybe not as great in, and ultimately people who are willing to listen, to fact, reason, appeal, anything along those lines, and be able to come together and make decisions and make sure that those decisions are being made for the greater good. Would you say that that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. We all should want to make this better, the city better. And if you don't belong up there. You don't even bother, because then you're just putting a void in it. We all shouldn't agree every time. And I like that we don't agree, but there's reason. Give me a reason why you don't agree. That's what I want. Don't just say no to say no, or say yes to say yes. If I ask you, have a reason.
Yeah, even if it's, hey, somebody already put my thoughts. I know I've heard you and a couple of other members of council, when you guys agree on something, you'll say, honestly, I agree, and I want to echo the sentiments of whatever, Councilmember Haney said, or whatever Councilman Hastings said, or what have you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not necessarily worth repeating your whole spiel, because then it comes off like you're almost talking for the sake of talking, which you may not be doing, but I love that you guys are at least I would say more than half of you are typically pretty good at realizing when less is more, and being able to humble yourselves and be like, okay, well, they kind of stole my thunder with whatever I was going to say, but I agree with that.
Yeah, say that. Say, I was going to ask that question, but don't ask it again.
Yeah, unless there's something to add to it, like if Hastings asks for clarity on a trip study and you were to say, hey, did this factor in, just because you're putting in this convenience shopping, that it's not going to solve for the need. And so the fact that you have this kind of zoning project for park commercial with convenience of like a CVS or something of that nature, and 200 more homes, like where are those 200 more homes going to grocery shop? Are they going to have to come down this corridor? Talk to me about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what we need to know each other's districts. It's happened a ton in mine. And you get, when the first time they meet with us, they show us this plan and it looks great, and you see these apartment buildings. But if you don't know the corner of or where they're trying to put that, you're wasting your time. Just because they're showing you what a software came up with, go drive by it and then look at it and say, okay, how many corners are they doing this on? And then what happens? Like I've always said, why do we don't need to grow up so fast? And I'm okay with an empty lot for a while. What's
the rush?
an attorney was really mad at me, and I've said it a few times, it's not my job to sell his land for him. I'm not a real
No.
attorney. It's not my job. So if it doesn't fit in the character of this district that I'm in, or any really, then it shouldn't go in there.
It also kind of like to get off, not to get too off topic, but you brought up real estate attorneys and selling of land, and it made me think. I'm curious, from your perspective, sitting on the dais, when you get a real estate attorney who's trying to rezone something, and all of a sudden it's like out of the blue, it's been sitting zoned as whatever it is for 10, 15, sometimes 20 or 30 years. And all of a sudden they're like, now we need this. We're not going to give 30 days to come back to the drawing board or what have you. I know we've seen that a couple of times in recent months where it's now or never. You're going to vote yes or you're going to vote no. How do you guys feel? Like, do you feel like they're just bullying you into trying to approve something? Do you feel like they're just trying to make the sale of the real estate and try to make it as lucrative as possible? Like what?
It's both. They're on a timeline with the landowner. Of course they are. And they don't want to wait because they don't want to have to go through it and make that person wait longer who hired them. They don't want to upset their boss. That's really what they're looking. But I don't buy it. I look right through it.
There's been times where I'm sitting there and I'm like, why now? Like, you've let it sit for 15 years. Why do you need to turn this over now?
Well, most of it's because you get we haven't been able to sell it commercial. It's been taking too long. No, just be honest. You're getting paid more. The land is selling for more if it's high density. They're paying you more. Just say it. Don't give me the spiel that we couldn't sell it and commercial's not needed. It's all BS. You're getting more money.
Yeah.
You just never say it.
Are you guys able to kind of call that out? Or is that something that's not able to really be said based on your rules?
I mean, we could, but I don't know the exact amount they're selling it for. If they would disclose, if I knew it and how much more it was, I just know.
Yeah, no, I know logically I'm following the thought progression, but it would be interesting to see because I feel like at least in the planning and zoning meetings that I've been to, which is only a couple, and then I've been to, far more city council meetings, especially in recent months, even watching the presentations, it kind of feels like we're not always getting the full story of why now, why this plan, why this.
It's always why now, because somebody's willing to buy it. That's all it is. It's not need. Sometimes I guess it could start off as need, but once that whole multifamily started rolling, every corner started coming in. Oh, surprise, has a housing shortage. Bang, let's go in. Now we can put this, and this in. And now they don't want to do it so much. So who was wrong? I don't think I was wrong.
I don't think you are either. And I think it's funny that it always seems like it's something that they're kind of trying to shill or put a label on, whether it's a housing shortage or we couldn't sell or anything like that. It just,
that's why
it'd be interesting.
Not one resident's ever called and said, I can't find a place to live. So you're using that U.S. housing shortage line. Does Surprise have a housing shortage? I don't think so, because I would have heard about it. And if I haven't heard about it, then I'm not doing a very good job.
Yeah, I think more what I see is people stuck between a rock and a hard place of some sort of financial tragedy striking and needing help making rent, or, that's more of what I see. And even then, it's not necessarily like social media is proliferated with it.
And there's not a lot of things we can control, but with rezoning, we can control that. So be diligent in it. Like, the job is not that difficult if you just want to learn what you're supposed to be doing. And when you come in, look into these. Don't just go off the cool 5 pages they hand you. Research it.
Yeah, I mean, even Google Maps and Google Street View
go out there
a lot. Yeah, if you can't, but I'm saying, like, if you can't find the time to drive, like if you're just slammed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, aerial view tells you a lot about what the area is that you're looking at. And, you see horse properties right up to the property line of something where somebody wants to put, 500 apartment homes. And I use that as an example because it's just like, it's so true. Right? Because number one, the folks that have the livestock in that area don't want all of the noise. And most people that live in an apartment style life, like if I'm renting an apartment, I don't want to smell manure. You know what I mean? And if you're on the edge of that, they're never going to be able to rent out those units anyways. So it's just it's funny how those things come together and everybody has a differing opinion. We're just about done with the questions. The last one, I think, kind of leads into this, what we've been talking about, which is differing opinions and everything. So with our city being as diverse as it is, and Quite diverse. I mean, the variations that we see on opinions of what the focus of our local government should be, how to solve for these issues, these concerns. So in your opinion, how do you feel things are going with the way that citizens are able to interact, and what additional either safeguards to protect our right to speak up during council meetings? Or do you think there should be maybe not necessarily more restrictions on the speech, but just ways that we're able to communicate? Because obviously when you have a bunch of people showing up to council, right, it's very easy for the meeting to get derailed. So I guess, how do you balance the need of the people to talk versus the needs of the government to operate?
Well, I wouldn't put any restrictions on people who want to come up and talk. Now, when people start yelling from the back, all you got to do is just hold on, walk up first if you want to say it. Like, don't fill out the sheet. I mean, there's whatever. If not a public hearing is a public hearing, fine. If you really want to talk about it, not everyone knows the process. Oh, you need to fill that out. This isn't a public hearing. This one isn't. This is. If somebody spent their time away from probably their own families to come to talk about something they're passionate about, let them do it. And if the horn goes off or whatever, the alarm, and they still got a few things to say, let it go. It drives me crazy. Like, don't put that kind of stuff on people this is why halftime nobody shows up. It's empty. And when people do, I actually like it. Because
it makes your night interesting for sure.
Yeah, and you find out how people think. We don't know all. We're not like the rulers. We don't know everything and we learn from people. Like, there's people that come up and say things that I had no idea about. And then you go, oh, okay, well, now I'm going to find out what that was about. But if we just said, like, the whole thing of don't repeat what somebody else said. Okay, go ahead. If you want to say the same thing, say the same thing. I don't care. It doesn't bother me.
I think when you get to that sort of content restriction of, it's already been said, you can't say it again. People have different ways of making the same point. And even if, let's say, it's myself and Quintus Schultzka, right? Because I know we've been kind of seen more recently sitting next to each other at city council meetings. And a lot of times in the order of the call to the public, it's like he'll speak, I'll speak, or vice versa. And sometimes he and I will say very similar things, but it's the manner in which it's presented and the way, like, he'll make one point with the string of facts, and then I'll take the same string of facts. And I'm like, hey, so he may have said A, B, and C, but here's X, Y, and Z that you also need to consider.
Yeah, and I think some people forget we signed up to do this. We chose to go sit up there, and people, it's nerve-wracking to go in there sometimes. And I hate it. It kind of feels like a courtroom. And I've heard people say, and they're nervous, and most people will say, I'm really nervous. I wouldn't be. And of course, if they think you're going to shut them down or they can't say what somebody else said, they're going to be nervous and not want to do it. And then you're taking the whole point of those meetings away.
Yeah, especially for a city that seems like it could use a lot more resident involvement in making sure that not just you guys are making the decisions that you're elected to do, but you have a bit more confidence to say, hey, I know that I'm making this decision based on what the people want because this is what they're telling me they want.
And it's harder when no one says anything.
Yeah, I know there's been, I think it was like a couple of years now, maybe a year and a half ago, something like that, where some of the speaking time had changed and things like that. And I remember reading one of the things that you were quoted saying, I think it was an article in The Independent, so I'm pretty sure Jason Stone had written it. But I remember you being quoted as saying, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but it was basically like, look, like if 20 people want to get up and say the same thing, that's their right. That's what we were elected to do, is listen to the people.
Yeah,
and I think that speaks volumes about you.
Everyone always jokes that I just want to, shorter meetings the better. Like that's the joke on council. It's always nice, but who cares? It's twice a month. I mean, honestly,
if we and some agendas are heavier than others. Like there's some where I look and I'm like, ooh.
But then sometimes the long ones go by fast. It's weird how it works.
Yeah.
But let people speak. I have no issue with it. Just come up. You took your time out. Just come up.
Well, thanks, Patrick, for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And
no I like that.
All right. Well, hopefully you all found this as interesting as I did to hear directly from the candidates on some thought-provoking questions. I know personally I was pretty excited at the chance and the opportunity and just the overall willingness from the 4 folks that graciously participated, be able to hear from them, right, in some less formal circumstances than we would typically come across them in the community, say at a council meeting or what have you. It was great to just have a human to human, person to person type of a conversation on what their views are, what they bring to the table, where they see the city going, vision for the future, and most importantly, how despite any differences in vision, politics, viewpoints, how we all come together and move forward as a community, and how they move forward, the new folks that are going to be in office early next year, move together as a governing body to serve our city. If you haven't already, I do encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to the Grand Failure Beyond the Streets podcast, as well as, of course, give a listen to our previous episodes, and even more importantly, all 4 of these episodes in our special mini series, which once again, I am aptly dubbing as the candidates. Don't forget to tune in after the election. So sometime in August here, right around the corner, if you can believe that, I'm going to be wrapping up the very first exciting season of the Grand Failure podcast. This is your host, Rebekah Massie, signing off for now, and I will see you at the polls on July 30th. Surprise. Take care.
You're listening to The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets, a podcast about the ongoing public safety crisis in Surprise, Arizona.
The Grand Failure podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Rebekah Massie. Jonathan Perry is credited with the voiceover and announcement work. I'd like to thank Spotify for podcasters as the hosting and distribution platform, and the folks over at Audacity for the open source software that made production and editing of this podcast possible. Any graphics, logos, or artwork used to promote or identify the podcast was created by Rebekah Massie herself using the Canva software program. Sound effects and music are provided courtesy of freesound.org unless otherwise noted, and Freesound is a website that offers royalty-free Community Commons licenses for a variety of sound bites, songs, and effects. I'd like to take a moment to give my heartfelt thanks and appreciation for each and every candidate that participated in this mini-series, and specifically those are Councilmember Patrick Duffy, Mr. Johnny Melton, Mr. Ed Cunningham, and Mr. Kevin Sartor. Any sources, news articles, or other information, including the candidates' websites if available, will be linked on the webpage dedicated to the Grand Failure podcast on thegrandfailure.org. That's thegrandfailure.org. I'd also like to thank the local political action committee, or PAC, by the name of Voice of Surprise, for their partnership and my efforts on this podcast, as well as give a quick shout out and thank you to my husband, Mr. Brian Massie, who has graciously put up with my work on this endeavor. Thank you all for your time, and for all of the podcast credits, details, and information, head on over to my website, thegrandfailure.org.